The rebellion will continue to gain a support in the Imperial Senate.
The Imperial Senate will no longer be of any concern to us. I have just received word that the Emperor has dissolved the Council permanently. The last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away.
With that line in A New Hope, the character of the Emperor is established within the Star Wars universe. However, would it surprise you to learn that between this point and his ultimate reveal in Return of the Jedi, the Emperor's backstory was drastically changed? I'll be covering all of that and more in today's Star Wars lore episode. Hey guys, this is Eckhart Slatter. Hello and welcome to another episode of Star Wars Lore. This is a video that I actually considered not making. I had done a bunch of research on this topic, and right when I was about to record the video, Pablo Hidalgo posted on Twitter and basically covered a lot of the content that I initially wanted to talk about. Regardless, I do think I can bring some new perspective to the conversation, at least on YouTube. So today we're going to talk about the initial backstory for Emperor Palpatine. Specifically, this video will examine how the Emperor's character changed between his initial mention in A New Hope and his first reveal in The Empire Strikes Back, and then really the fleshing out of his character in Return of the Jedi. I'd like to give credit in this video to Michael Kaminsky, who wrote The Secret History of Star Wars. Without that book, I would not have been able to make this video. So as I mentioned, we're looking at Palpatine's evolution from A New Hope to later Star Wars movies. I will not be mentioning the various other versions of the Emperor that existed in earlier Star Wars drafts like Emperor Xerxes, but perhaps that could be something interesting for another video. So the first real concrete evidence we get about the character of the Emperor actually comes from the novelization for A New Hope, which actually throughout Star Wars Legends continued to give insights into the galaxy. The prologue says, aided and abetted by restless, power-hungry individuals within the government and the massive organs of commerce, the ambitious Senator Palpatine caused himself to be elected President of the Republic. He promised to reunite the disaffected among the people and to restore the remembered glory of the Republic. Once secure in office, he declared himself emperor, shutting himself away from the populace. Soon he was controlled by the very assistants and bootlickers he had appointed to high office, and the cries of the people for justice did not reach his ears. This is a very interesting quote. On one hand, we can see the roots and the origins of some aspects of the prequel trilogy that would come to be very important. Lucas often focused on massive commerce guilds, largely affecting galactic politics. Although their involvement in Palpatine's rise to power would change, this is indirectly the first mention of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. However, this version of Palpatine and the Emperor is much different than the ones that we would later get. He is power hungry, but rather than being controlling, he is controlled. He's not the powerful figure that we'd come to know and love. The novelization also mentions that there were multiple emperors, and it seems that even when the Republic elected their leader, he was still called the Emperor. It also suggests that by the time of the Star Wars trilogy, Palpatine may not in fact be the Emperor anymore, and that the government may be being led by someone else. None of this contradicts what we learn in A New Hope. We know that the position of Emperor is a very powerful one, as he's able to dissolve the Senate, but we don't know who the Emperor is and whether that person is in control of the entire government. However, the novelization's version of the Emperor would not last very long. Remember, the novelization came out before the movie. By the time Star Wars was released, Lucas had already changed the backstory for the Emperor. He was still a corrupt politician, but he was no longer now being controlled by some outside shadow council. Lucas used Star Wars as a very thinly veiled critique for the modern world. We see the earlier critique of business interests meddling in the government, and the Empire was basically seen to be a version of America where Richard Nixon was given full power. I'll talk more about this later, but my point is the Emperor has now evolved from being controlled by corrupt politicians to being the corrupt Richard Nixon-style politician himself. Before the release of The Empire Strikes Back, Lucas described the history of the Old Republic to one of his colleagues. By now, the story had changed to the following. Much of the Senate in the Old Republic had been bribed, and a lot of influence had been vested in a few key individuals. This allowed Palpatine to be elected as Chancellor, and during some sort of crisis or conflict, he was allowed to run for a second term, although the Galactic Constitution only allowed Chancellors to run for one. Eventually, he was crowned by much of the Senate as Emperor for life, then he killed off any opposing senators, and then also the Jedi, who rushed to their defense. Obviously, this version of the Emperor's backstory is now fairly similar to the one we get in the prequel trilogy. However, by now, the Emperor is still not a Force user. This is reflected by early versions of the script for The Empire Strikes Back, where the Emperor is seen in lavish gold robes, he looks like an ordinary person, he's basically supposed to be a corrupt politician. However, even in early versions of the script, the Emperor was supposed to make reference to feeling something in the Force. This would add some complexity to the character and would basically leave the audience wondering whether he was really just a corrupt politician. The second full draft of The Empire Strikes Back transitioned the Emperor from a corrupt politician to the sorcerer that we all know and love. In a 1980 interview, Lucas gave some actual concrete backstory to the character, saying that after the Old Republic wasn't able to elect a competent official, the government collapsed and a sorcerer, a bad counterpart to Yoda, declared himself Emperor. Then the Emperor subverted Vader and killed the Jedi. By this point, the character of the Emperor was fairly well established and wasn't drastically changed moving into Return of the Jedi. The actual story of the Emperor in Return of the Jedi would change quite drastically as the film underwent revisions. In early versions of Revenge of the Jedi, as it was then called, the Emperor was supposed to kidnap Luke himself and take him to a Coruscant-style planet. This is outside the scope of today's video, but perhaps sometime I'll talk about early versions of the Star Wars movies. That being said, the story that I've given you in this video represents the basic changes made by Lucas to the character of the Emperor throughout the writing process. I think one thing to take away though is that the key aspect of the Emperor's character has always been his subversion of the democratic process. More specifically, the creation of the Emperor's character was supposed to represent the dangers of a democracy decaying into a dictatorship. Lucas talked about this in 2006, saying it was never anything where the bad guys took over. It's always been a thing where it was given to them. It's based on Caesar. It's based on Napoleon. Star Wars is partially a message to the viewers about how to safeguard democracy and protect against tyrants like Palpatine in whatever form he takes. Anyway, that's all for today's Star Wars lore video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I considered not making it, but I'm really glad I did. The research I got to do was quite enjoyable, and I highly recommend you guys buy The Secret History of Star Wars. It goes over most of what I mentioned in this video, and a whole lot else. For anyone who wants to talk more Star Wars tonight, I will be streaming Battlefront 2 at twitch.tv/EckhartsLadder. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe, and hey, as always, may the Force be with you.